Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Access to Democracy returns. I'm your usual host, Alan Miller, and with me today is someone who we hope will become your unusual host, Steve Francisco. Steve has been with us on numerous occasions, certainly most conversant with federal fiscal policy and federal policy in general, and he has handled a couple of interviews recently, and I asked him as we approach August, we go into our 13th year and 1,250 plus interviews. Hey, would you like to take the burden off a little bit and do an interview every now and then? And what did you say?
And I said, absolutely, I'd be delighted to help you out, Alan.
So let's talk a little bit about Steve Francisco first, and let people get to know you a little bit better. Give us some background.
Well, I grew up in South Minneapolis. I graduated from Roosevelt High School in Minneapolis. A few years after James Janos, Jesse Ventura, a lot of other alumni from that high school. But then I went on to Macalester College, my first year of college, because I got some nice scholarship money. And then some of that money dried up the second year. And this is way back in the mid-1970s, and I couldn't afford the outrageous tuition of $4,500 a year at that time. I think the tuition today at Macalester is probably close to 10 times that.
I would say.
But I transferred to the University of Minnesota and was in CLA, College of Liberal Arts, where I was a political science major, my bachelor's degree in political science, and then stayed on and attended the University of Minnesota Law School and earned my Juris Doctor in 1981, and after that did a stint as a law clerk in the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, which was a really interesting experience, and then went to Washington to work for Congressman Bruce Vento in 1982.
The late Congressman Bruce Vento.
That's right.
Who left us much too early. And generally, what did you do with the congressman?
Well, I was a legislative assistant and initially was responsible for a range of issues, particularly Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, pension issues. Social Security at the time I first went to Washington was a really hot topic then, as it has become now too. Because Congress was considering some major changes to Social Security in the mid-1980s, which finally passed in 1986. But it was a tremendous experience to be in Washington at that time. And you know, back in those days, I'm actually looking back at it from a historical perspective now, because those were days when Democrats and Republicans actually worked together to try to get good things done for the country.
Instead of trying to one party, and I won't mention who it is, trying to destroy the party in power in the White House at the present time, but we all know what's going on. We all know that certainly Republicans like Mitch McConnell have said that their only mission is to make Obama a one-term president, and sad that is compared to what your experience was.
My experience was that when Ronald Reagan was president in his first term and Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House, I mean, they could disagree, like fight like cats and dogs during the day, but at the end of the day, you frequently found Speaker O'Neill going down to the White House to share a drink with the president. And you had more of an attitude of we may have different perspectives about what we should do legislatively, but we're all trying to do what's good for our country. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of that has been lost in our politics. There's this demonization of people that you don't agree with.
The country is certainly the less for it.
I think that's true.
I think it's a sad commentary on where we have gone today. I attribute it to a lot of things, not the least of which is the attitude of the Tea Party to the Supreme Court, and some of the atrocious decisions that have come down in the last few years. But notwithstanding that, you left Washington at some point and headed back
Well,
to
actually,
Minnesota.
after I worked for the congressman, and that was from 1982 to 94, then I stayed on in Washington and did a stint for another 10 years as legislative representative for the United Steelworkers Union. And that was a tremendous experience as well. I mean, I got to be in meetings with Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch and Hillary Clinton and John McCain and Robert Byrd. And so I was involved in a lot of high-level meetings and had numerous opportunities to actually testify before congressional committees. And it just, for anybody who has always had a lifelong interest in federal policy as I have, I couldn't think of a better job than that. But I did leave Washington in 2003 and came home to Minnesota, where I had grown up and gone to school. I came home because I fell in love and married a lady from here in Minnesota, right
That'll
here in
do it.
Eagan. That did it.
That will do it, yeah. And your wife, and let's talk about her.
Right.
Is a professional.
Right. Bonnie is the administrator for a group practice of neurosurgeons in Minneapolis. She's been doing that 10 years. Prior to that, she was a healthcare administrator at Summit Orthopedics. Bonnie's about the same age as me. I'm a year older than her. She was born and raised part of her childhood in St. Cloud, and then grew up the other part of her childhood in Winona, Minnesota. And she's a graduate of St. Mary's University in Winona, and then University of Minnesota for her graduate degree.
And of course, the Francisco family has been enhanced somewhat since then also.
Yes, well, we've had just had a recent addition to the family. I have a great nephew now. I had one previously too, but we just have welcomed Logan Miller Francisco. Logan Michael Miller to the family recently. This would
With the
be
Miller
my niece's
part, it
daughter.
can't be bad.
Can't be bad having a Miller in the family. So yeah,
Yeah. Do you have a dog also?
we don't have a dog. We
Oh,
have
I
a
thought
cat.
you did. You
No,
have a
we
cat. I knew there was an animal in there
Angel
someplace.
Face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Angel Face.
Who's
yeah.
very wise for a cat. She seems to always know what's going on before we do.
Well, animals have that unique instinct.
They do.
So, you were sitting here with us during the last interview, and we had a lot of unexpected things happen. We anticipated 2 guests, then we found that we had a foreign-speaking guest who had to have an interpreter. Some of our volunteers did not show up who we thought were going to show up. Do you still think you want to take a crack at this?
Oh, of course. I mean, I think you have to learn to roll with the punches. That's true whether you're hosting a television show or just in daily life. Unexpected things happen, and I guess that's just the way it is.
With Mary and Dwayne, who have been with us for years and years, they are like the rock
Right.
upon which this program really is founded. But then we have Ethan and Blake with us today, who are both MCTC students. And the one thing I will say about them is if they say they're going to show up, they show up. You can really count on that.
Yes.
But we have so much to do in preparation for the show, and we were talking about it. You have to line up your guests. You have to confirm them a few days before. And sometimes they'll cancel at the 11th hour, and then you have to run around and try to find a substitute. But even if the same guests are secure for the show, you then have to clear it with Thomson Reuters, which is so important to us. And so really, between our wonderful studio here and the security, you have to see that there's somebody to bring
right.
them down from security. You have to do the factoids that, in fact, there's one right up on the stand on the screen right now. Research. And I guess you're familiar with research.
Something that I've gotten to do. Well, at this point, as you interview me today, I've interviewed 2 guests previously, and I'll be doing my 3rd interview shortly. And that's a really important part of making a show like this work, in addition to the great technical support that you have and the support you get from Thomson Reuters, without which we couldn't do this show.
And I have to mention U.S. Federal Credit Union,
that's
who was
right,
our very
sponsors.
first sponsor, Bill Raker and U.S. Federal,
Right.
without whom we
couldn't
probably
do
would
it.
have gotten this far.
But doing research on our guests is really fun, and that's one of the things I'm actually enjoying most about being your alternate host on some occasions, is getting to learn more about the people that we get to interview. And it really is a privilege because, you know, we live in this tremendous community with lots of talented people who do lots of interesting things. I'm just thankful that we're in the internet age where I can go online and Google and dig up all kinds of newspaper articles and YouTube interviews. In the old days, I guess you and I would have had to make the trek to the library and see what we could find out about our guests. But
And
now,
you still wouldn't have been able to find as much
that's
as
right.
you can
There's just so much out there.
within minutes
Yeah,
now.
there's so much out there, so much information that's accessible, and it's fun.
Now, you are a much more mellow person than I. I am a much more a-personality person than you. Maybe you won't scare off some of the guests. I have a lot of trouble getting Republicans to come on the show. There are some really courageous Republicans like Pat Anderson who will go hammer and tongs with me, and others, the county attorney, Jim Backstrom, people like that.
Right.
Some of the county commissioners. But our local representatives and our congressmen now won't come on the show anymore because, not that I am abusive to them, but they don't like to answer the questions that I ask, like why are you a member of ALEC? Why did you take the pledge for no new taxes? Which is more important, your oath or the pledge, your oath to the Constitution of the state or the pledge, things like that. Maybe you can work your way around that with some of these guests. I
I'm
don't
going to
know.
try, Alan, because I think that, you know, this program, you've had a lot of different guests on here from a lot of different political perspectives, actually. And
We've had Green Party.
You've had everybody,
We've
yeah.
had independents.
You've had apolitical people, too.
A lot of them.
And
yeah.
so I think
we
that
had some Whigs back there. And,
you've been doing the show longer than I realized.
and some Tories, yeah.
Yeah.
But
I think one of the great opportunities of a show like this is to really create a platform where you can get information from elected officials, other guests who aren't in public office, but who are doing interesting work or doing interesting things in the community. And, you know, I think I think it's okay. My philosophy is it's always good. It's okay to ask tough questions, but there is a distinction between asking tough questions and just being, you know, obnoxious and difficult. I don't think you've ever been that. I think that it's fair game to ask elected officials tough questions because
if you can't
they
ask
work
them
for
what they
us.
stand for
Right.
and why they voted a certain way, then really what's the point?
That's right. And that should be true for regardless of whether they're Democrats or Republicans. I think we're all served better when we really try to hold people accountable and find out what they believe in, what they do, because after all, they're supposed to be representing us. And
Now,
so,
have you read You Can Make a Difference from Cover to Cover?
Alan, you may recall that you had me on the show some time ago and you showed me the book. I didn't know you had written the book at that time, and I bought the book right here on the set.
That's true. I think you were the first one
Maybe
to buy the
because
book.
you mentioned me in the book because I've been a guest on the show 6 times. But it really was fun to go through the book and see how many different people have sat in this chair and been interviewed
There
by
is an
you.
exam you know.
Oh, I hope I
hu-
can pass.
100 questions about the show, but
Yeah.
no, it really is a good how-to as to how the show works and how to make it work.
Yes.
And particularly, you are certainly articulate, but you will find at some point that you're going to get a guest who is a one-syllable guest, and you're going to have to carry the interview. This is not an easy thing to do, but it has happened on occasion. People freeze up, they get nervous, or that's just the way they are.
Right.
And, you know, give me some background. I'm a machinist.
Right.
Well, could you have a little bit more than that?
A little more.
I've been a machinist 20 years. Well, come on.
Yeah.
You got to pull it out of that person and really relax them to the point
Yeah.
that they're not intimidated by the camera, and they're not intimidated by you, and they're not intimidated by anything else. Also, when you talked about preparation, my theory is come in here with at least twice as many questions and topics as you can handle in the 30 minutes. That
Actually,
way,
less than 30 minutes,
you
really.
never run-
27
wow.
minutes and 30 seconds. When
Well,
you take the
I
time
still
off.
refer
Yeah.
to it as 30 minutes,
Right.
but yeah, you're absolutely
But it's
right.
very compressed and it happens very
and
quickly.
make sure you don't want to run out of topics.
Right.
Like right now, I have nothing left to say to you, so you're on
What
your
would you
own.
like to talk about? Do you want to talk about the recent Supreme Court decision? Talk about what's going to happen with health care from here on out? Talk about
What do you think about the fact that the Chief Justice sided with the four liberals on the court to uphold affordable care, not under the Commerce
Right.
Clause, but under the Tax
taxing
Clause?
authority? I was very surprised that Chief Justice Roberts was the one who ended up basically saving the Affordable Care Act. But I still have some concerns. You know, you point out he did this under the tax provision, but I was interested going back and looking at the decision by Justice Ginsburg, who wrote a separate concurring opinion. She would have upheld the health care law on totally different grounds than the Chief Justice did. She basically said, I believe that Congress has the power under the Commerce Clause to pass this provision. They
As-
were talking about the individual
As
mandate.
most of the pundits did.
Right.
But nobody, I think, certainly that I've read, could foresee that it would be the Chief Justice.
Right.
They
Everyone
that
thought it
maybe
was going to be Kennedy,
Right.
Justice Kennedy, and so the fact that it was Chief Justice Roberts was surprising, but the basis of his opinion is what concerns me, that finding it under the taxing authority and basically really in a way it could be read as starting to restrict the scope of the Commerce Clause, and we'll see how that plays out in the future, what the impact will be on other decisions.
I can't imagine that nationwide health care does not fall under the Commerce Clause. I mean, it just is a natural concomitant to commerce, and that really surprised me.
This is going to continue to be, I think, a very divisive issue in our politics, because we have a country that has very sharply different views right now about what the role of government is, what the proper role of government is, what it should and should not do. But really, when you look at our history, Alan, for 236 years, this is nothing new. We've had these arguments going back to the very beginning of the country. And we get loud and boisterous and we disagree sharply. But to me, the question at the end of the day on this healthcare reform is going to be, do we end up covering a significantly larger number of people who are currently uninsured?
30 million.
30 million or more, and the fact of them being uninsured drives up the healthcare costs for all of us.
And the fact of the matter is that children can stay on their parents' plan until they're 26.
26.
People can't be denied because of pre-existing conditions.
No lifetime cap on benefits. When
Right.
insurance companies prior to this law could say, well, you've cost us this much money and we're going to kick you off, even though
And-
you've continued to pay your premiums.
And thanks to Senator Franken, insurance companies now have to put the bulk of their premiums, surprise, into insurance.
Right.
Most Minnesotans are going to be getting refund checks this summer from their companies because their companies devoted more to administrative costs than they really were allowed to
Right.
do. And people don't appreciate that, but that was a great coup by Al Franken.
Right. And one of the provisions in this law that has caused a lot of consternation, and which I'm very worried about, is this trend that we see of a number of governors in states who are opting out of the expansion in the Medicaid program to try to cover people who may not qualify for Medicaid right now because they earn a little too much, but they don't earn enough money to buy health insurance. And people forget that there are subsidies in this legislation to help people who can't afford to get insurance. I think one of the biggest misrepresentations about the Affordable Care Act is to call it a government takeover of health insurance. It's a lot of things. It is not a wholesale government takeover. It is not a single payer system. It is still primarily
Sad that it is not.
still primarily based on the model of buying private insurance. And it does expand some of the government programs, but it is not. I'm always kind of astounded when I hear people talk about this government takeover.
It's not going to put any insurance company out of business. As a matter of fact, it's going to enhance the profits of the insurance companies simply because so many more people will be covered.
Right.
And when those people are covered, they're not in emergency rooms. And when they're not in emergency rooms, the costs are not 6 to 10 times what they would be for normal coverage.
That's right.
And people will be able to go to a physician that they couldn't afford previously for a regular checkup, so that something doesn't then become exacerbated
That's right.
and an emergency.
Right.
And people don't understand it. People are just hung up on reality shows. We are losing the ability to read newspapers. I have nothing against Twitter, but you can't have a conversation in 140 characters, and you can't do it on Facebook either. And just the conversation that we're having back and forth here is indicative of communication, which is fading rapidly in
Right.
this society.
And I think that, you know, when people are polled, the polling I've seen says that, you know, basically when the question is posed as, would you support a government takeover of healthcare, overwhelmingly people say no. But then when you ask people about individual elements that are in this new law, such as the insurance reforms that you talked about, parents being able to carry their kids to age 26, no lifetime limits, no co-pays on pre-screenings, no differential treatment and premiums for women versus men, the public is overwhelmingly supportive of those individual provisions. And so to those members of Congress who just voted even this week in the House to totally repeal this law, I'd say I think the question needs to be thrown back to them. What would you replace it with?
And
What
they
would you
haven't
do?
offered one thing in terms of what they would replace it with, other than to slash and burn. Reminds me a lot of the Tea Party in 2010 or 29 in 2010, when there were elderly people with signs, "Keep government out of my life, don't take away my Social Security."
Right.
Hello? I mean,
A government program.
yeah.
And also I'd point out
one of
many
the
of
most
these
successful government
well,
programs
these,
in history.
these members of Congress, too, who are, you know, vociferously denouncing this new health care law, I believe every one of them receives government health care that we all pay for. As a congressional staffer, I used to get it.
75% of Congress and their employees' health care is paid for, and they have multiple plans to choose from,
Right.
paid for by the taxpayer. How anybody in Congress can say, I'm entitled to that, but the
But my
average
constituents
taxpayer
aren't, right.
is not entitled to that, I cannot fathom it, and I cannot fathom the lack of understanding of that. We're paying for them to deny coverage
Yeah.
to everybody.
I would say this too, Alan. I don't think I worked out there 21 years and saw this process close up. They said somebody once said watching legislation be made is sort of like watching sausage. It's not pretty. But I would tell you this, I don't think this healthcare law is a perfect law. I don't think Congress has ever passed a perfect law. I think what we're going to see, what usually happens is we find hopefully some things work. There are going to be some things that don't work as well, that should be revisited, should be corrected. But to throw it out and to go back to where we were and say it's okay to live in the richest country in the world and have, you know, over 30 million of us with no insurance, is not a tenable solution.
138 other industrialized countries offer some
That's
form
right.
of universal care. It may not be the same as what is under this, and this certainly is not universal care yet.
No.
I wish that we had just gone to Medicare E and said everybody is covered. Unfortunately, we didn't have the Congress that could have
Right.
sustained that.
Right.
But it would have made sense, and nobody would have been the loser.
Right.
As opposed to what's happening now, and the rancor and the anger that's being generated basically on lies and false statements.
I'm glad that Governor Dayton and most of our legislature have realized that with this law coming, they have moved forward, unlike some of the other states, to create these state-based insurance exchanges, which when you hear the word exchange, all that really means is you're creating a marketplace, the kind you talked about earlier, Alan, where people get to look and compare insurance plans and to pick the one that's best for them. Not where the government is saying you have to have this particular plan, but picking a plan that works for you and your family.
And, this is one of the things that you're going to have a good time discussing with some of the legislative candidates, some of the people who are running for Congress. You get somebody like Mike Obermuller in
Right.
here. I hope that we can sponsor some debates. I have offered our local candidates who are presently sitting the opportunity to debate. So far they haven't responded, but then they didn't respond for 2 years to my offers to come on the show. So, but I would like to have it. We did in days past have some really good, fair, spirited debates on this show of people running for office. I think that our viewers are entitled to it. I think that our viewers, based on what they tell me, enjoyed it and look forward to it. And I think it's a responsibility of an elected legislator to do that. Not to hide behind a podium at a Chamber of Commerce debate that nobody sees except members of the Chamber of Commerce. This show is seen probably by 15,000 people any given show, because we're on for 3 or 4 times a week with our different shows at different times, and that's what it's all about. That's why I started this way back when, and now we've just about run out of time. So let's have some closing thoughts from Steve Francisco.
Well, Alan, just to tell you that I want to thank you personally for the opportunity to be your guest and to be your guest host occasionally on this show. I think it's, the work you've done here over the past 13 years is really amazing, and I hope to try to fill part of your shoes here and help you out when I can and carry on that tradition, because our community is better for it.
Well, we're in good shape with your knowledge and your very calm demeanor and your
you're very kind.
background.
Thank you.
And I look forward to enjoying some of your shows as we step forward further into 2012 and into our 13th year. Steve Francisco, thank you so much.
Thanks, Alan.